Thank you.
All right, so this is our Owain Glyndwr presentation. It's a very special month because it's always celebrated, I believe, around the 22nd or the 15th.
16th tomorrow.
16th. Thank you. Oh, tomorrow. Okay. So Gareth is our presenter. He was born in Penybont Ogur. Did I get that close?
Bridgend, yes.
Otherwise known as Bridgend in South
Yes.
Wales, located about a half-hour drive west of Cardiff, so South Wales. Gareth studied and worked abroad in another country, England, and for a number of years he was a teacher there, and then he returned home to Wales and continued teaching until his retirement. He has been very interested in history all his life, so I can see how you went over to the Owain Glyndwr Society to find out and be a part of that. At his retirement, he became the secretary to the society and has been very much involved with them. The site itself started in 1996 in order to honor the memory of Owen Glyndwr and keep the history and the culture alive. I'm back to where I was now. See, because they wanted, he's truly a great, Owain Glyndwr is truly a great historic figure for Wales, and they want to keep that alive. The society works to have things, to influence the history curriculum in Welsh schools, as well as keep Glyndwr's name and spirit alive through Eisteddfod competitions and other events that are happening in Wales. So the society, I assume, shows a presence in those various events to help that his image stay fresh in people's minds. Currently, Gareth lives near Coity Castle, which is fairly close to, I think, your home area, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, right, good. And he noted that Owen Glyndwr attacked this Coity Castle during the War of Independence for Wales. So some of the stones that have fallen off, I saw pictures of that, Gareth. Some of the stones that may have fallen off may have been actually part of Owen's attack at that time. So aside from other things and the wonderful presentation we're going to have today from Gareth, he also enjoys rugby. And I would assume you have a team you might follow, Gareth?
Yes, unfortunately, they lost yesterday. Bridgend, Penybont, they lost against Newport.
Oh dear. How are they in the standings?
Well, it's the first game of the season, so it's not a great start.
Oh, okay.
So they're in last place, but they can come out of it quickly.
Very.
Well, they got a bonus point, so they're not quite last, I don't think.
All right, let me quickly.
No, wait, I'm not done. So Gareth, we're quite happy to have you here today with us to give us some great information, and also I think you're doing a PowerPoint along with it, correct? Yes. So I would like to hand it over to you, and thank you very much for your presentation.
Our croeso. Thank you for the invitation and the welcome. As Margaret said, well, I'm hoping that a number of you know a bit about Glyndwr already. And if not, those of you who only know his name, I'm going to try and expand his story, give you a summary of not just the great man's life, but the campaign as well. I'm obviously biased because I'm the secretary of the society, but I've been the secretary, as I said, for 10 years now, and it's really about promoting his name and his story. And I've done a lot of reading on it. Some people call me a fan, others call me a fanatic, but I'm somewhere in between, probably. I'm going to call it Owain Glyndwr and his Uprising rather than his War for Independence. Firstly, because it fits onto the screen, and secondly, it's a bit more politically correct over here to say that. People get uppity when we talk about independence now. I know I'm going to struggle to fit everything in, and I know I'm going to be cut off probably in a minute or two. But what I'm going to try and do is, for the first 5-10 minutes, is give a background to the campaign. I'll go back to the Romans, so I'll go back a couple of thousand years, and then I'll get on to Glyndwr's story as quickly as I can, if this all works properly, of course. Okay, here we go. Yep. So when the Romans arrived at the beginning of the 1st century CE, or AD if you prefer, the Celtic or the ancient British tribes in Cymru were the Siluris in the south, the Nitai, Ordovices, the Eanglai, and the Gangani. And over the next few hundred years, the Romans basically defeated them. It took them about 30 years to get control, but then gradually took control. And in 383 AD, if you've listened to Davies Iwan's song, Ymar o Hyd, Maxen Wledig took all the Romans out. The Romans left with Maxen Wledig in 383 AD, and immediately some Irish settlers, in fact, before then, Irish settlers had come into the western coast of Cymru and settled in the southwest and the north. Now, it's the ones in the north that cause the problems, and so the rest of the British, especially those in the Hen Ogledd, the old north, decided to do something about it, and they sent one of their best men, Cynedda down, who basically took control of the north. And not only did he do a good job of getting rid of the Irish problems that were caused in North Wales, or North Cymru, Gogledd, he settled there, and his male line of descendants ruled the area for the next 400 years. And we're talking there about Gwynedd in the north. And his sons were also, he had many sons, and Ceredig, for example, was one of them, and Ceredigion is one of the regions down in the southwest, which they founded. And you can see a few of the other names there. Some of them were of Irish descent as well. The houses in Demetia, and particularly Dyfed and Brycheiniog, as in Banau Brycheiniog, with the Brecon Beacons now, they were founded by Irish settlers in the southwest. Okay, I'm rambling now. I need to crack back on Glyndwr. So a few generations later, one of the descendants of Cynedda was Cadwallon ap Cadfan. And I've included him because he was famous for repelling attacks from the Anglo-Saxons. And at a place called the Onnenau Maigion, which we're going to mention again later, he defeated a Mercian force led by Penda of Mercia. Penda then joined him and managed to combat the Northumbrian threat to Cymru as well. But we'll come back to that story later. That's why I mentioned him. Some of the more famous names of leaders at this time were Rodri Mawr. You didn't get the epithet Mawr unless you were a particularly powerful person. Rodri the Great in English. And although that was given to him later, it showed that he controlled not only Gwynedd, but also Powys and Ceredigion and the area to the south of it. So he was one of these people who managed to unite take over basically different parts of Cymru. Similarly, his grandson, Hywel Dda, did the same, and he created Deheubarth in the southwest. But he is more famous for the laws that were introduced during his lifetime, and they are called the laws, or Cyfraith Hywel Dda, the laws of Hywel Dda. And they were used in Cymru for the next 500 years or so. Some of them were used up until Henry VIII's time in the 16th century. So he was an important figure. But possibly the most important figure of that time was the only person who was Brenin Cymru, or could be regarded as the King of Wales. Now, if we simplify that map, we've got Gwynedd, Powys, Deheubarth, the main houses, but also Morgannwg at the bottom. Now, the other kings had not controlled Morgannwg, but Griffith ap Llywelyn did. When he took Morgannwg in 1055, he held it until 1063 when he was killed in North Wales. He was in control of the whole country, and Brenin Cymru, as I said, King of Wales. But the person behind his assassination, his death, was Harold Godwinson. So from our point of view in Cymru, 1063 was an important date. After that period, after that time, it was called the Oes y Tywysogion, the Age of the Princes. But of course, 3 years later, over the border in England, when William of Normandy came across and defeated Harold in battle, basically he took control of all of that country, all of England. So we'll talk a little bit about the Normans or the Normanniaid, because William decided that he couldn't do the same in Cymru as he could in England. The terrain is different, plus because Griffith ap Llywelyn had been killed. Are we still okay there?
Mm-hmm.
Yep,
Okay,
everything's fine.
good. Sorry, a message just came up. A message just came up on my screen again, just to worry me. Because there were after Griffith ap Llywelyn's death, Cymru had split back into its separate houses. It would be more difficult for him to take control of it. So what he did was set up a buffer zone down the border. He set up earldoms in Chester, Shrewsbury, and Hereford, but also went across South Wales. He sent Robert Fitzhamon into Glamorgan, and they controlled that. And also with Flemish support, they took Pembroke. And so consequently, this marcher land was set up to segregate and enclose the Cymry, the Welsh. And so the bit that was left is what we're going to talk about now, because a number of significant leaders appeared in Cymru at that time. One of them was Rhys ap Tudor in the southwest, but also Griffith ap Cynan and his son Owain Glyndwr in North Wales, in Gwynedd. Unfortunately, I haven't got pictures of them, but I have got pictures of, or statues of, the next few people. Rhys ap Griffith, or Yr Arglwydd Rhys, the Lord Rhys, was down in the southwest, and he died in 1197. He was succeeded as the overall controller of Wales, if you like, by Llywelyn ap Rhiolwyth, or Llywelyn Fawr, again, signifying his status. He was in control of at the time. He died in 1240, and a few years later was succeeded by his grandson, Llywelyn ap Griffith. Now, he is also known as Llywelyn ein Llyw Olaf, Llywelyn, our last leader, because on his death, under the auspices of Edward I, Edward then took control and built all of his big castles in North Wales, his iron ring of castles, if you like. And this was the end of the Age of the Princes, and it's a time of great upheaval in Wales, because obviously they were then under the thumb of the English more than they had been. And Edward and his successors imposed very strict penal laws on the Welsh and taxed them heavily. Right, so let's get on to Owain Glyndwr. As you can see in the family tree, on the bottom right-hand, at the bottom side of it, you can see Owain's name highlighted. And this will hopefully give you some idea of why he was considered a Mab Darogan, the prophesied son, the person who was going to lead Wales out of this terrible time for them, especially as around about the time, just before Owain's birth, a Pladí, the Black Death, had swept through Europe and had caused a great deal of social upheaval in the country. And so if we look at Owain, on his father's side, up the right-hand side of the family tree, we work our way through lots of Griffiths and Maddogs, back up to Bleddyn ap Cynfyn, who was a great-great-grandson of Hywel Dda, so we're back to one of those people I mentioned. But more importantly as well, on his mother's side, his father was the Lord of Powys Fadog, so Powys was an important part of his hereditary. But also on his mother's side, her father was Thomas ap Llywelyn, who was the Lord of Deheubarth, a descendant of Yr Arglwydd Rhys, one of the people I mentioned, and Rhys ap Tudor, and up his father's line goes back to Hywel Dda as well. But interestingly, Yr Arglwydd Rhys, who's in the middle of that picture there, his mother, Gwenllian, who was killed at Kidwelly in 1136, was the daughter of Griffith ap Cynan and the sister of Owain Glyndwr, who were the kings of Gwynedd. And so through their line, they go all the way back to Rodri Mawr through the House of Gwynedd. And so Owain was, if you like, the best fit to be the leader of whatever came in Wales, whatever uprising happened in Wales. So, what flags could he fly? Well, he could fly a few flags. From his father's side, his father was the Lord of Glyndwr and Cynllaeth, which are in northeast Wales. And so Glyndwr could fly this flag, which is the flag of Powys Fadog. Through his mother's family, the House of Deheubarth, and through both of them, as we saw, I've got another message coming up, sorry. Right, God. Through both of them, we've got connection to the House of Gwynedd, back to Rodri Mawr. So he could have flown that flag, but he didn't, because about 20 years before the uprising, in the 1370s, a distant cousin of Glyndwr called Owain Glyndwr, who was a great nephew of Llywelyn ein Llyw Llywelyn the Last, he was fighting for the French against the English in the 100 Years' War, and he modified that flag so that the lions, the 4 lions, were not passant with 3 paws on the ground with 1 raised, but instead he turned it so that there were only 2 paws on the ground, and he was up for a fight, basically. And although we call that the flag of Owain Glyndwr now, and as you can see, it's behind me here, and tomorrow I'll be wearing my shirt as well, as we do. Although that's regarded as a flag of Owain Glyndwr, it was one of his distant cousins, but we're glad to claim it. And there's one more flag I need to mention, and that is Glyndwr's battle flag. And this is a Ddraig, the golden dragon. And the reason that Glyndwr used this was because this apparently was based on the flag of Uther Pendragon, the father of Arthur, King of the Britons. And so what Glyndwr was doing with this was drawing on those ancient British roots that a lot of people had, and it attracted lots of Cymry, lots of Welsh people back from England, where they may have moved and further afield, in order to fight for him in this War of Independence, his uprising. Okay, so what do we know about Owain Glyndwr? The answer is not a lot. If he'd been born as a nobleman in England, then we'd know where he was born, when he was born. Same with his death. We'd probably know from his suit of armor what his inside leg measurement was. But Glyndwr wasn't an English nobleman. He was an Uchelwr, a Welsh nobleman, who, and he was very close to the English border. So a lot of his neighbors were English landowners who were keen to show that they were superior to him, which probably led to a lot of the uprising. Where was he born? We don't know, but there are 2 places in particular that we think he could have been born. Sycharth, which is about 6 miles to the west of me here in Oswestry, is just the other side of Offa's from here. And in fact, that hill going up at the side is Park Sycharth, and about a mile over the top is where the border is, the modern day border, well, ancient border as well, of Offa's Dyke. But this was a particularly fabulous home. His father, Griffith Vychan, had built it on top, we think he built it, on top of an old Norman settlement. It was described in great detail by a travelling bard called Iolo Goch. And he described how fine the house was. It had chimneys, which was very unusual at the time for this sort of property. It had a moat. As you can see in the picture, there's a fish pond. There were a couple of fish ponds there. It had a dovecote. It had a vineyard. It had all the trappings of a grand gentleman. And he, there's a very good chance that he was born there, as it was the family's manor house. What you can't see in the picture, because it was a cloudy day when this was taken, is that there are some mountains in the background, and they are the Berwyn Mountains. Just the other side of that is the Dee Valley, and that's where Llangollen and Corwen are, 2 towns in the northeast of Wales, and that's where the other part of Glyndwr's lands were. at a place called Glyndwr. Glyn means valley. Dyfrdwy is a name for the River Dee. So we think that his hunting lodge was where that bush is in the middle distance there. And just behind there, you can see a row of trees. The River Dee is just the other side, which people often holiday there for their salmon fishing and all the rest of it. It's a big hunting area for grouse, etc. And so it would have been his playground, if you like, as a child. So they are the two places that we think Glyndwr was probably born at. But there's one more, and that is way down in southwest Wales. This is a place, as you can see, Trefgarn Owain. So the Owain was a bit of a giveaway. They thought that this was where he may have been born. But there is another reason. It's down near Tyddewi or St. David's, right in the corner of Pembrokeshire, western side. And this is a farmhouse called Trefgarn Owain. But it was owned by the time of Glyndwr's birth by his aunt, Margaret. And she had inherited it from her uncle and Glyndwr's great uncle, who was Owain, the brother of Glyndwr's grandfather. And so we think that it was probably a tenuous link. Because the family owned the land, there is a chance that Glyndwr's mother was visiting there when she had Glyndwr, but the money is on either Sycharth or Glyndwr as being his birthplace. And when do we think he was born? Well, he gave evidence in a trial, a famous court case, which lots of people gave evidence. The Crachach, the important people gave evidence, such as Geoffrey Chaucer and Bolingbroke, Henry Bolingbroke gave evidence at this trial. But Glyndwr did as well, and it said that we think he was born in 1359. But again, that is only an estimate, I'm afraid. Okay, so what happened? Well, the problems came for Glyndwr in around 1370, when he was about 10 or 11 years of age, probably, because his father died, Griffith Vachan died, and Glyndwr, because he was so young, couldn't take over the estates, and Glyndwr was the eldest son. And so, consequently, it was taken under control of the local lord, the Earl of Arundel, Robert Fitzhammond. Oh, that doesn't sound right. Robert Fitzallen. And that doesn't sound right either. Robert Fitzhammond. Richard Fitzallen, sorry, get his name right. Richard Fitzallen, who was the Earl of Arundel, but also a local landowner called Sir David Hanmer. Now, David Hanmer lived about 20 miles to the east of Sycharth and Glyndwr. It's the bit of Flintshire, the old Flintshire that sticks out into England. And he was a particularly important man because he was a chief legal advisor to Richard II. Consequently, he took, after Glyndwr had been placed under his wing, he took Glyndwr down to the Inns of Court in London, where Glyndwr studied for 6 or 7 years, trained to be a lawyer, learned, he could speak Cymraeg, Welsh, obviously, French, he could read Latin, he could also speak a bit of English, which it was only the peasantry, if you like, that spoke English at the time. Okay, internet connection, still looking dodgy, right back. But then in 1383, Glyndwr got married at the church that's in the picture. This is in Hanmer, where I mentioned earlier. And we think that that doorway, which hopefully will enlarge, is where Glyndwr and his new wife married. And her name was Margaret Hanmer. She was the daughter of Sir David Hanmer. And this is significant because this is 1383. Glyndwr then took control of his, retired, if you like, from studying down in London, and took over control of his estates in Glyndwr and Sycharth, and acted as the lord of the area. And as a lord, he was obliged to pay homage to the king. He had to send troops if the English king wanted to go on an invasion. He also had to, well, he did attend himself. He and his brother, for example, Tudur, a younger brother, were based in Berwick-on-Tweed in 1385 and were part of the army going into Scotland. And in 1387, he served under the Earl of Arundel in a sea battle just off Margate on the south coast of England at the Battle of Kadzan. So he did his service, if you like, as an uchelwr, as a Welsh nobleman. But in 1387, Sir David Hanmer died. And although David Hanmer had 3 sons of his own who were all very capable, they were all lawyers, although one went into the clergy, I think, it was Glyndwr that took over control of the Hanmer estates as well as his own. So he was obviously regarded as an important person in that at the time. And so for the next few years, Glyndwr went back to Sycharth and Glyndwrdwy and basically lived a life of peace and tranquility. Had at least 10 children with his wife, Margaret, and by the sounds of it, maybe a couple of others. But these stones are of particular interest because there's a boundary between his estate in Glyndwrdwy and the estate of Reginald de Grey in Ruthin. And this set of stones is an ancient marker, but at the time of Glyndwr, it was the boundary between Glyndwrdwy to the south, or the left of this picture, Ruthin to the north, and behind the cameraman here is Yale, or Yal in Welsh. And so these 3 lordships met at this point, and this was called the Table of the 3 Lords, or Bwrdd y Triarglwydd. And unfortunately, Reginald de Grey, who was the Lord of Ruthin, decided that he wanted some of Glyndwr's land. And throughout the 1390s, he was continually trying to land grab south of this marker. And Glyndwr was successful every time. When Richard II was king, all of the decisions went to in Glyndwr's favour. But when it came to 1399, and the English throne was usurped by Henry Bolingbroke to become Henry IV, and Richard II was then incarcerated and eventually starved to death a year later, things started to change because Reginald de Grey was a big friend of Henry IV. Consequently, the first decision, which was taken to Parliament down in Westminster about a land grab by Reginald de Grey, went in de Grey's favour. And a lot of people say that this was probably the spark which started the uprising. So here we go, the uprising. It was in 1400, it started at Glyndwrdwy. Now, if I turn the camera about 90 degrees to the clockwise, we'd see that mound where we think his hunting lodge was. But this is called Glyndwr's Mount, or Glyndwr's Mount. And it's said that on September the 16th, 1400, Glyndwr was proclaimed Prince of Wales, or Tywysog Cymru, by a group of friends, family, and supporters around this mountain. There would have been a few hundred people there. And this was the start of the uprising. About 3 miles to the west of this, in the distance, is Corwyn, the town of Corwyn. And a few years ago, they erected a statue to Glyndwr there, which is where I'll probably be tomorrow at about 11 o'clock. But this statue, pretty impressive, you know, in full tilt, to show that the start of the uprising was very close to this point. So what did it involve? Well, the first place he attacked on September the 18th was Ruthin, because Reginald de Grey is the one who stole his land. And so he was the first port of call. And it's about 10 miles probably to the north of Glyndwrdwy. What did Glyndwr and his forces do? Well, early in the morning, they attacked the town, burnt it to the ground, and put the castle under siege. But they didn't stop there. They went about 10, 50 miles further north to Denbigh or Dinbych and attacked that. They attacked the town, burnt it to the ground, and put the castle under siege. So they were doing this, you know, repetitively. It was a fairly destructive road trip up around northeast Wales in the first week of the campaign. And he did the same at Rhuddlan, the castle up there. He did the same in Flint. and in Hawarden or Penarlag. But they didn't stop there. That's in the first 3 or 4 days. They then went to the border to the castle at Holt. Again, burnt the town, attacked the town, burnt it, and put the castle under siege. About a mile behind me to the on top of the hill, he burnt the town of Coesaswart or Oswestry. And finally, on the 23rd of September, he attacked Welshpool or a Trallwng. And again, did exactly the same as he did at the previous castles, previous towns. But on the 24th of September, as he was traveling northwards, he was intercepted for the first time by an English force, which had traveled from Shrewsbury and crossed the River Severn, roughly where the bridge is there, intercepted Glyndwr, and Glyndwr's forces disappeared into the countryside. Sorry, that's Brwydyr y Fynwy, or the Battle of Fynwy in English. And basically, they disappeared. Glyndwr's forces melted into the countryside. Because you've got to remember, every place that I've mentioned so far was an English-held town. These were satellite towns that had been formed by Edward I about 120 years earlier, and the castles had been built. English people had been brought in to do all the maintenance and to run the towns, and the Welsh were only allowed into the towns during the hours of daylight. And so once darkness, when it was getting dark, they had to leave the town and melt into the countryside, go back to their houses and their villages in the countryside, which made it easier for Glyndwr and his guerrilla tactics of warfare, because Henry IV didn't work that way. His brain wasn't as militarily aware as Glyndwr's. Glyndwr developed tactics which involved light soldiery, light infantry, whereas Henry IV relied on very big armies being sent in. And funnily enough, that's exactly what Henry did. On the first of his royal expeditions into Cymru, or invasions by any other name, he took a large army across the north of the country, over to Ynys Môn or Anglesey, hopefully not where Sue is now, attacked Llanfaes Priory over there, and basically was looking for Glyndwr and a couple of his cousins, Rhys and Gwilym ap Tudur, but failed to find them. And as with a lot of the campaign, he was sent back with his large army, defeated by the weather, and also failing to find Glyndwr. So it wasn't just in 1400, at the end of September 1400, it happened every year for the next 5 years. He'd send a big army in, sometimes 3 armies in different parts of Wales, but every time he failed to find Glyndwr and had to return to England with very little gain, and usually with very bad weather conditions demoralizing his army as they did so. Okay, I haven't been turning my pages, so I've got to catch up with myself, sorry. Here we go. Right. Over the winter, as with most of the winters around this period, everything went quiet for a few months. Apparently, there were very harsh winters, lots of snow, etc., very cold, and people basically stayed at home. However, the following year, in 1401, on the 1st of April, which was a Good Friday, Glyndwr's cousins from Ynys Môn, from Anglesey, Rhys and Gwilym ap Tudur, attacked Conwy Castle, and not only that, they took it. They took control of it and held it for the next 2 months. Now, the uprising in the first week was a big event. It was a shock for people in Wales and in England. But this, if you like, was a pebble being dropped into a pond and ripples causing. It sent shockwaves, not just through Cymru, not just through Wales, but it scared the English, because this castle shouldn't have been taken. A couple of months later, in the summer of 1401, there was a battle near Aberystwyth in mid-Wales, just south of Machynlleth. And Glyndwr's force, a smaller force, attacked and defeated a much larger force which had travelled up from Sir Benfro, which included both English and Flemish soldiers. And so this was another pebble being dropped into a pond, causing more ripples. It was starting to build. Now, obviously, Henry wasn't happy about this, so he went on another one of his royal expeditions. And he went through Cyfadryn, through South Wales, to Ystrad Flir, or Strata Florida, and basically desecrated the place. There's account that he may have killed one of the monks, who was particularly raucous, but definitely the monks were turfed out along with the abbot, and they used the high altar. His horses apparently were stabled at the high altar of Ystrad Flir. So he was basically disrespecting the place, probably because a lot of the previous kings of Deheubarth, such as Yr Arglwydd Rhys, were buried there. And so he was making a point. And obviously Glyndwr wasn't too happy about that. And at the time, as with all the other expeditions by Henry IV, he was looking for Glyndwr. And he was given some assistance in the area because a local lord called Llywelyn ap Gruffydd Vychan offered to help him to find Glyndwr's army. And obviously he was a Welshman, a local landowner. And so he took Henry IV around the countryside in search of Glyndwr until eventually the penny dropped with Henry IV that he was being led on a wild goose chase. And so what he did was take Llywelyn to Llandyfri or Llanymddyfri, and in the market square on the 9th of October, he was hanged, drawn and quartered along with his eldest son. And as you can see, there's a wonderful sculpture there now, which was unveiled about 20 years ago. But that sculpture, although it's next to the castle, overlooks a big car park, which is fairly inauspicious in Llandyfri, but it's aiming towards the market square where Llywelyn had been killed in 1401. But the reason why Llywelyn was such a supporter of Glyndwr was that two of his other sons were actually fighting with Glyndwr. And so that's one of the reasons he led Henry astray. And again, things went quiet for a while. I say went quiet. Henry, of course, had just been on a fairly big expedition through Wales. But the big event of this time came at a battle in mid-Wales when Glyndwr was working his way down towards the south of Wales, near the border at Brynglas, which is near the English town of Knighton, well, the Welsh town of Knighton, but in Welsh it's Trefyclaw or Trefyclawdd. And the story is that Glyndwr and his forces were positioned on the top of this hill, and on June the 22nd, Edmund Mortimer, a local marcher, leader of the Marcher House, brought a big English army, a large English army across the valley, up the valley, along with a number of English knights who were local to the area. And when they saw some of Glyndwr's troops at the top of the hill, the order was given to charge up the hill to get them. Now, we don't know the reasons why he did that, but it's fairly obvious that the Welsh arrows travelled further downhill than anything being fired uphill would reach. And the English force was massacred, basically. And the trees you can see in the middle of the picture there, halfway up the hill, were planted on the spot where a mass grave had been found of lots of skeletons. So we knew the battle had taken place in this area. And the story is that Glyndwr routed the English. And more importantly, 3 key English knights were killed, but Edmund Mortimer, the leader of the English, was captured. And he was the second person that Glyndwr had captured within a couple of months. A few months earlier, he captured Reginald de Grey, his nemesis from his next door neighbour, if you like, from northeast Wales. And he'd held him for ransom, and eventually Henry IV had paid the ransom. The trouble is, with Edmund Mortimer, Henry IV refused to pay a ransom for Edmund Mortimer. And the reason is that Edmund's nephew, also called Edmund Mortimer, was the 5th Earl of March. And it was only a boy at the time, but he had a better claim to the throne than Henry IV. So Henry very cleverly was looking after young Edmund, and consequently didn't want the older Edmund, his uncle, to be on the loose and being allowed to go around promoting the Mortimer family. And so what did Glyndwr do? Well, at the end of November 1402, he released Edmund, and Edmund immediately married Catrin, one of Glyndwr's daughters, and joined Glyndwr in the uprising, which was a significant event because he, as a leader of a Marcher family, was instrumental in getting support from that area as well. Okay, I speed it up a bit. Glyndwr didn't stop there. Another road trip. He went to Aberhonddu or Brecon and attacked the town and the castle. He attacked Bronllys just to the south, Tretower to the east, Crickhowell further to the east, and eventually Abergavenny, which was a fairly substantial castle. And although he didn't take them and hold them for long periods, he attacked the towns. The towns would have been severely burnt, and kept the castles under siege for as long as he could. And he didn't stop there. He went further south to Bryn Bega or Usk, to Casnewydd, Newport, Caerdydd, Cardiff, and Caerphilly. Now, all of these were attacked at least once by Glyndwr's forces over a 2-year period from 1402 to 1404. And although he didn't hold them, as I say, for very long, it was significant. He was building up momentum in his uprising. But then, a big event in 1403, in July 1403, he decided to lead a campaign from mid-Wales down Afon Tawy, or Dyffryn Tawy, along the River Tawy to Caerfyrddin or Carmarthen, which was the most significant town, if not in South Wales, then the whole of Wales. It was a significant place. And the first place they attacked was Llandovery, or Llandovery, because that is where, less than a year before, just over 6 months before, his supporter had been killed and hung, drawn and quartered. But again, he didn't stop there. Down the Tawy Valley, he attacked Dineford, which was next to Llandeilo, and attacked the town. He was joined by a lot of supporters at this stage. Drysloin, he didn't need to attack. The sheriff of Drysloin Castle actually handed over the keys to try and save damage. That damage was done centuries later. It wasn't, but Glyndwr can't be blamed for that damage there. Carrick-Cennin. Oh, I've got another message. Okay, it's gone. Right, Carrick-Cennin was a castle which was under the stewardship of John Skidmore or John Scudamore. And although Glyndwr negotiated with him for a short time, that castle was put under siege, a significant castle as well in the southwest, until eventually on July the 6th, Glyndwr attacked and took Caerfyrddin, Carmarthen Castle, and held it for a few weeks. So he was again just flexing his muscles, if you like. He was showing the English of these towns, the English occupants, that he was capable of attacking them. And it's at this time that he stabilized. It's around this time that he took control, really, of the whole country. He attacked Crickeith Castle and took that. He attacked Aberystwyth and Harlech and took those. Now, Harlech was particularly important because the year before, in May 1403, the son of Henry IV, the future Henry V, led an army into Glyndwrdwy and Sycharth and burnt them to the ground. So that Glyndwr's 2 homes had been singled out and basically demolished. And so Glyndwr basically went up market and moved into Harlech Castle. And that was his family home for the next 5 years, and also the center of his operations. And just to consolidate that position, he promoted the statesman aspects, statesman-like aspects of his reign, because where that building is in the picture on the right is the Senedd D in Machynlleth, this building was built a few decades after Glyndwr. But on that site, he was proclaimed, crowned Prince of Wales, and a number of people were there. He'd invited 2 people from every commot or every community around Wales to be there to witness it. He'd also invited and had emissaries from Scotland, from Ireland, from France, from Castile, basically everybody who was fighting against Henry IV at the time. He'd invited there, and they witnessed this as well. So he was showing all the trappings, if you like, of a Prince of Wales or King of Wales. The monument on the left there is basically how our society got formed. And it's only a few hundred yards from the Cyneddu, the house you can see on the right. But it's the monument that was unveiled to commemorate the 600th anniversary of Glyndwr's campaign starting, his uprising starting. Okay, a few months later, in the summer of 1404, he again focused his army down in the southeast of Wales. He knew that he had to control that area. And the picture there is of a pub, as it would be, but it's the Skirrid Inn. It's a famous pub. Some people claim it's the oldest in Cymru, in Wales. But it's just to the north of Abergavenny. And the steps you can see there, they say that Glyndwr sent his army off towards Grosmont to attack it in 1404. We don't know if it's true, of course, but people still call in for a pint at the pub. Within a few days, they attacked. They were aiming to attack Grosmont, which is just to the east of the pub, but they were defeated, a big defeat, heavy defeat at Campston Hill on Mynydd Campston, but regrouped, and a few days later won a fairly big battle against an English force at Craigadorth, which is a few miles to the south. And not only did they win it, they chased the English army back to Monmouth or Trevunwy and attacked the castle, or attacked the town after that. So this was a time when Glyndwr, although he had a defeat, he was still in the ascendancy and was in control, pretty much. However, to consolidate that and make sure of it, he made plans for the future and decided that when Henry IV had been defeated, preferably in a battle, then he and a couple of other people would take control of both Cymru, Wales, and England. Now, as you can see the lines here, this line, you can see my cursor on there, but this line is basically Wales with the Marcher lands added. So he had a good deal of Shropshire and Herefordshire, half of Worcestershire, a good amount, all the way up to Manchester in the top and Liverpool in the top. Right, I've got another message on the screen. Come on, thank you. And that part to the west of there is Glyndwr's. He would have taken control once Henry IV had been defeated. The line to the south in England would have been the Mortimer families, so his son-in-law Edmund Mortimer and his nephew, the Earl of March, would take control. And the rest of it would have been run by Henry Percy, the Earl of Northumberland, who again was disenchanted with Henry IV and had sided with Glyndwr. So these prominent people were going to take the English portion, if you like. Okay, and so why did I mention all of that again? Well, the key point where those 3 areas meet is exactly where the Onnenau Meigion battle was supposed to have taken place in 630, so a few hundred years before. But in Welsh legend, this is where the Cymry, the Welsh, defeated the Saxons. And in this case, they'd be regarded as the English. So Glyndwr basically wanted to confront Henry IV there, defeat him, and then the 2 countries would be split into 3 and his plan would come into effect. And that was signed on February the 28th, 1405. Okay, but things didn't go to plan, unfortunately. Within 2 weeks, Glyndwr's forces had attacked Grosmont, which was the third biggest town in South Cymru, South Wales, and led by Rhys Gethin, one of his best lieutenants, and severely defeated. Once they'd attacked the town, a large force of English troops piled out of the castle and devastated the forces, and Rhys Gethin was killed. A couple of months later, another battle, just as bad in its result for Glyndwr, at Pwllmelin, which is Usk or Bryn Biggar. It's the battle which is near the castle. And they did exactly the same. This time led by Glyndwr's son, eldest son, Griffith. They attacked Usk or Bryn Biggar. Then a huge force came out from the castle and devastated them. And this was a particularly big blow for Glyndwr because his brother, Tudur, was killed, along with many of his force, but also Griffith, his son, was captured, taken to prison. He was incarcerated in Nottingham first, I think, and then ended up at the Tower of London, where he died a few years later. And so this was a big blow to Glyndwr. And you would think that was the end of his uprising. But there was a ray of hope, because in the following August, a few months later, a large force from France arrived to support him. And apparently it was in excess of 5,000 men arrived, because Glyndwr had signed a treaty with Charles VI, the King of France, a few years earlier, and Charles had promised to send this force to help Glyndwr take over England, basically. And obviously the French had various reasons for doing that. And at the beginning of August 1405, they landed at Milford Haven, Aberdaugleddau, and their first objective was Caerfyrddin or Carmarthen. And the reason is that the French were absolutely mad about the story of the Arthurian legends and King Arthur and Merlin or Myrddin, his magician. And Caerfyrddin is supposedly the place where Merlin was born. And so they attacked a few other places. They attacked Hulforth or Haverfordwest, Dinbych y Pysgod or Tenby, excuse me, before taking Carmarthen fairly easily by the sounds of it. A bit like the earlier castle Drysloin, the people in Carmarthen, after the first attack, said, look, the doors are open, please don't harm us. And to be fair, they didn't do much harm. After Carmarthen, they set their sights on the Anenamaigion, this place where they were going to confront the English king. But again, because they were mad keen on Arthurian legends, there's a good chance they took the scenic route and, a bit like tourists, went to Caerlleon or Caerleon, which at the time was regarded as where King Arthur's Round Table was held, and myths and legends associated with it. So they had to go via there. They attacked the outskirts of Worcester or Caerwrangon, and then set their sights on the Anenamaigion. Now, unfortunately, they didn't get there, because Henry IV by this time had assembled a large army, or an army of sorts, and near the town of Great Whitley in North Worcestershire, he positioned himself on Aberley Hill to the north of the Teme Valley. Glyndwr and the French positioned themselves on Woodbury Hill, a mile or two to the south of it. And as you can see, there's a valley in between. They basically stayed there for 8 days in a standoff. And we don't know what was discussed. We don't know what happened. But we do know that after the 8 days were up, both sides retreated back from whence they came. So Henry IV went back to England, and the French travelled, hopefully on a map, from Great Whitley across country before eventually arriving at Cardigan or Aberteifi. And their leaders left on ships back to France before Christmas, and the rest of the French army had left by the following Easter. So basically, we don't know what happened. The only accounts we have of this are from French chroniclers, because the English chroniclers don't mention anything about it. So obviously, it may be a a different account from them. But Glyndwr wasn't finished, and about Easter 1406, he wrote a famous letter, the Pennell Letter, which was sent to Charles I and basically laid out his plans for an independent Wales. He wanted a Church of Wales based in Tyddewi or St David's, as opposed to Canterbury. He wanted Welsh-speaking bishops, and basically Welsh bishops and clergy, because at the time it was virtually all of them were English-speaking and from England, appointed by the English. He aligned himself to the French Pope, or the Pope rather, in Avignon, which was supported by Charles VI of France, as opposed to the Pope in Rome, who was supported by Henry IV. And so he was aligning himself with Charles VI. And finally, he also suggested, was planning to build 2 universities, one in South Wales, one in North Wales, which was radical at the time because the only universities in England, Wales, Scotland, in the British Isles at the time were in Oxford and Cambridge. So they would have been the 3rd and 4th universities in the country. And the only reason we know about this is because that letter actually made it to Charles VI and to France. And it's now being held at the Bibliothèque Nationale, the library, National Library in Paris. If it had been intercepted, then we wouldn't know anything about that, as with a lot of the documentation, of course. Right. Things started, unfortunately, to go downhill after that, because what Glyndwr didn't know was that Henry IV was in secret negotiations with Henry IV. Charles VI and Henry IV were planning to end the 100 Years' War and were negotiating without Glyndwr's knowledge. And Glyndwr's supporters at the French court, unfortunately, the main one, the brother of Charles VI, was assassinated in 1407. And so that's when things started to go downhill in a major way. Aberystwyth, one of the castles which was controlled by Glyndwr, was put under siege in 1407. And within a month, so was Harlech. In 1408, Aberystwyth fell to the English after a long siege, about a year, I think it was. And in February in 1409, so did Harlech. And this was basically a devastating blow to Glyndwr, because that had been his family home for 5 years. When the siege was lifted, Glyndwr wasn't there, but Edmund Mortimer, his son-in-law, was found to have died, probably of starvation. As I mentioned earlier about the harsh winters, there were many virtually every year was a harsh winter for them. But also Mared, Glyndwr's wife, Catrin, his daughter, and her children, Glyndwr's grandchildren, were captured and ended up at the Tower of London, where by 1413, definitely Catrin and her children had died. And this monument is on the site of St. Swithin's Church, which unfortunately was bombed heavily during the Second World War and was demolished. But this is where their bodies were buried. It was written down in records. And in 2001, one of our vice presidents of the society, Sian Phillips, the actress, unveiled this unusual looking sculpture. Hold on, I'll get the wording right. It's not that difficult, to be honest, but it's dedicated to Catrin and her children, and also the suffering of women and children in war. And so it's used for a number of purposes, but obviously from our society's point of view, it's to remember Catrin and her children. So what about Glyndwr? Well, we don't know what happened. However, there are reports that he spent a lot of his final years in Herefordshire, just around the border. He stepped down from the leadership of the uprising in 1412, and his last remaining son, his youngest son, Meredith, took over control of the uprising. So Glyndwr basically disappeared. And there are reports that he was at a place called Kenchurch Court, just over the border from Griesmont or Grosmont, because Alice, one of his daughters, married John Skidmore or Scudamore, who had been the captain of Carrick-Kenning Castle that Glyndwr had negotiated with years before. So we know that he's associated with Kenchurch Court. Another daughter supposedly married Sir Richard Monington, who had a property nearby, near Kenchurch, called Monington Straddle, but they had other properties as well in the area which he would have visited. And finally, another daughter, Sioned, married Sir John Croft of Croft Castle, which is at the north of Worcestershire, and north of Herefordshire. And although John and Sioned were probably dead by this time, their children lived there, so Glyndwr could well have been visiting grandchildren at the site. Now, I mentioned earlier we didn't know where he was born or where he died, but as usual, there are theories. And the best theory is that he died near Lawton's Hope, which is near the village of Cannon Pyon in Herefordshire. And Lawton's Hope was owned by the Monington family, as well as a place across the hill. And it's said that he may have died travelling between those two places they guess around about September the 20th, 21st of 1415. But again, it's a guess because people don't know. That was written about 40 years later by a travelling Italian monk who was picking up on stories. Whether it's true, we don't know. Where he's buried, we don't know. After initial burial, his body was dug up and moved elsewhere. And some people suggest that it was moved back to Wales, say the Abbey at Abbey Cumhir. Others say that it could be back near his birthplace up in the northeast, or it could still be in this area of Herefordshire. But this is part of the legend of Glyndwr. It's a bit like Arthur, where a lot of people say that he's asleep in a cave somewhere waiting to lead Wales again in an uprising. Okay, so why do we think he was so important? Well, as I mentioned, between 1403 and 1405, he controlled the whole country. If not directly, places like South Pembrokeshire and the Marcher lands, the borderlands, he was charging them a sort of Danegeld, a protection money, to not attack them and to make sure that that they kept their properties, if you like. But the rest of the country was basically under the control of Glyndwr. Why do we think he's so important? Well, he was the last real leader of Cymru, the Welsh, and he's gained, I wouldn't say a notoriety, but he's become famous in recent years because of this upsurge in feeling towards Welsh independence. And a lot of the imagery, especially flags like this, are used a lot by the independence campaigns here in Cymru in order to promote the story. And what are we doing? Well, as a society, Margaret mentioned earlier that we take part in the Eisteddfodau, the National Eisteddfod and the Urdd Eisteddfods, particularly keen on the curriculum. We managed to influence the history curriculum that's been implemented, or humanities curriculum that's been implemented a few years ago, to include medieval history, not just Glyndwr, but other parts of medieval. And we have a competition, a schools competition, where the winners will be announced next week, and they get a prize and a certificate and a little flag. But also the school gets money as well to try and promote projects on Glyndwr. And this year's competition was to write a newspaper article about one of the episodes of Glyndwr's campaign. And how do we do it? Right, last bit. We do that. We've got a Facebook page where we put posts on every other day. Obviously tomorrow, as it's Dydd Glyndwr, as it's his day, there'll be a post, at least one post on tomorrow. But we've also got the website where we add to continually. We're trying to extend it so that it includes the whole of medieval Wales, from the departure of the Romans up to the death of Glyndwr, which takes a lot of work, but hopefully it's of use. And schools definitely use it because they've been in touch. I'll stop there. I don't know how long. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you for listening.
This, can we be back, Wayne?
Right. I
I
can't
have
do
to
it.
unmute myself. Have you got some time, Gareth, for a question and answer?
Oh, well, of course, yes.
So now a lot of people
I'll
have
just-
muted themselves, but any questions for? I have one question for Gareth. The
Yes.
the area after Glyndwr was in that western part of Wales. You said Percy was above him. That sounds very English. Was he an English connection above where Glyndwr was?
Percy.
I wrote Percy. Did I not get it right?
Yeah, the
Is
Percy
this the
family was,
tripartite in? Sorry,
Let's see if we can.
Denshire. The bit
It was on
where-
what you had. You had it broken up into like Wales into like 3 or 4 sections.
Yes, that's right. The tripartite indenture was basically splitting up the two countries into 3 parts.
It just said
And
that
so
one
Glyndwr-
person. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Glyndwr took the Welsh part to the west. The Mortimer family would have had control of the southern counties of what was England, and the Percy family would have had the counties to the north.
Yeah. Now, were they English or Welsh? The Percys.
The Percy's English, very much so.
Okay,
His
that's
son,
what I thought.
Henry-
Okay. So
Yes,
even though
Henry Percy's son was another Henry Percy called Henry Hotspur, who was killed at the Battle of Shrewsbury in 1403, who was also a supporter of Glyndwr and a brother-in-law of Edmund Mortimer. So there were lots of family links between Glyndwr's side of it and the English.
Okay.
If you like. Yeah.
Any other questions? A lot of people are still muted, so if you want to ask a question,
I tried-
you got to unmute
I didn't-
yourself.
this is Luann. I didn't want to miss the presentation, but when we're done, in the next couple days, I will try to send something out to Susan and Ed and Evan for distribution. Some of it you might be able to get. There was a British ancestry series called Coming Home, but I haven't been able to figure out how to watch it in the US. If you have BBC Select through Prime Video, you might be able to get it, but I'm up to my ears in what I pay for technology, so I've drawn the line. But there was also a BBC Who Do You Think You Are program, and I can't remember the name of the comedian, so that's why I have to look it up and we'll send. But both of them were descendants of Owen Glyndwr, and they said there's probably tons and tons of them in today's world just because of the way we all populate. But they were very interesting because their reaction when they went to see the areas and what they learned is pretty interesting just to know, oh, gee, I'm Welsh and those could all be part of
Yes,
my Welsh relatives too.
Yeah, there was one episode of Who Do You Think You Are, the genealogy program, with Greg Davies,
Oh, that's
the-
who it was.
really tall comedian,
Yep,
6'7" or so.
I will
But
try right now to
It
try to
wasn't,
get that.
yes, it wasn't Glyndwr, it was Owain Glyndwr.
Oh, I thought it was Glyndwr. Oh, well,
I don't think it was
saw it
Glyndwr.
months
I
and
think
months
it was
ago, so
Gwynedd.
thank you for correcting me.
Yes. Well, no, that's okay. But Owain Glyndwr would have been related to Glyndwr,
Right.
way back. But also they took Greg Davies into a pub
Yes.
and told him that, yeah, that's right, told him that he was descended from Owain Gwynedd, the king or the prince of Gwynedd. And he was particularly chuffed about it until he went into the pub and they asked everybody who was descended from Owain Glyndwr to stand up. And everybody did, because they'd all been invited there because they also shared the lineage, which was funny. Yes.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. I have a question.
Yes, Margaret.
Since Owen lived at the Harlech Castle for, I believe you said 5 years.
just about, well, 4.5 years
Well, fine.
probably, yeah,
Oh, we'll give
best
him
part
that.
of 5.
Half year. And learning some of the Welsh songs and hymns, there's a song called Men of Harlech. And I wondered
Yes.
if that had anything to do with Owen.
It might have had some semblance, but it's mainly due to involved with the War of the Roses about 80 years later, 70, 80 years later, probably 70 years later, maybe, because there was another siege there then, which was involved with that fight. And I think the Civil War, the English Civil War, there was a siege.
Okay. I was wondering, and I didn't have time to run down and get my songbook, but
Yeah, we'll claim it anyway for Glyndwr, but we'll claim everything.
yeah. It just seemed like he did a lot of roaming and moving on always to the next castle. Generally, when you lay siege, don't you have to leave a hunk of your army behind to?
Yes, you do. Yes, sorry.
I just wondered, did he have quite a few followers so that he could always somewhat leave people behind?
Well, when the French arrived in 1405, in August 1405, they came with about 5,000 men, but they were greeted by about 10,000 Welshmen.
Oh.
So he did have a big force. But I was at a talk a few weeks ago where they mentioned about the first week of the uprising and the fact, well, how on earth did they manage to attack all of those castles and travel such great distances for an army at the time? And the answer was, well, they didn't all do it. It was a coordinated effort. And so some people would have been there waiting to join in at the places. Plus, of course, a lot of these would have been local peasants. And so they couldn't afford the time away from their farms in order to join this and take a week out of their working life in order to join the campaign. So he had a lot of this, and a lot of the people who supported him, leading figures from around the country, probably served with him in the English army a number of times, and they were probably as good military tacticians as Glyndwr was. And so they would be calling on, they would be using their resources very well and developing these guerrilla tactics. And another thing, I mentioned his brother Tudur, a younger brother, apparently looked very similar to him. And when Tudur was killed at the Battle of Pwllmelyn in 1405, a lot of the English thought that he'd managed to capture or kill Glyndwr. And it was only because when they took his helmet off or whatever, they noticed that the body didn't have a mole underneath or above or near his eye. And they knew that Glyndwr did. So his brother must have looked a fair bit like Glyndwr. And that is another thing. There was a couple of battles in the summer of 1401 near Dolgellau and a town about 2 or 3 miles away, where simultaneously Glyndwr was leading armies into both.
Wow.
And it's thought that Tudur was probably dressed identically to his brother, and so that they could separate and cause confusion in the English forces. So a lot of it was tactical. It was it was done cleverly. Let's put it that way.
And how long did he serve with the English army, learning?
Well, not long. It was part of paying homage to the king. He had to, in order to be an uchelwr or a Welsh landowner, he had to send troops and obviously taxes, etc., as well to the English king. But when Richard II wanted to attack into Scotland, Glyndwr mustered a few troops, took his brother with him, and went up and served up there. And a similar thing happened in September, well, the summer of 1400, because Henry IV, the new King Henry IV, was going to do the same thing, go up to Scotland on an expedition. But the story goes that Reginald de Grey, Glyndwr's neighbour, withheld the summons for Glyndwr to go and join them until it was too late for him to do so. And so Glyndwr was proclaimed a traitor to the English crown because he'd refused to go. the fact that he hadn't had the message didn't seem to matter. He was immediately, and another reason why the uprising happened, because they thought that Glyndwr was a traitor now. But it's all, some of that is all theory, of course.
Very interesting. Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, it's medieval life was hard and
Yes, very hard.
Yeah, whether you were landowner would certainly help, but for the poor, etc., weren't a lot of options. Let's put it that way. And
but if you read the poem about Sycharth, it shows just what a grand life Glyndwr was leading while he was the landowner, when he was the in charge of his estates there. And there's a project underway now where somebody's writing about from the viewpoint of a peasant who lived at Sycharth and all the things that were involved with his life.
Oh.
And very interesting. It's good. I like that.
That's excellent.
Oh, excuse me. Question here. There's the story oft repeated that the King of England several times sent a message knowing that Glyndwr was out there somewhere, asking him to surrender, and the reply came back, never. And he on that, what the origin of that was.
Well, no, exactly. Towards the end of it, when Glyndwr had stepped down, well, in fact, during the uprising, a number of pardons were offered and declined by Glyndwr. But significantly, he was offered a pardon, I think it was 1415, the early months of 1415, and he declined it. But the offer was repeated by Henry V in 1416, and it was his son that declined it. And they think that that's why Glyndwr died in September 1415. But the actual pardon, if Glyndwr was dead, his son had taken over the uprising, and the actual pardon that was accepted was in 1421. And so the uprising didn't really finish until I think it was April 1421, when Meredydd, his last surviving son, accepted the pardon. But there had been attacks across the border for a lot of the years. So even though Glyndwr stopped in 1412, it carried on for a number of years afterwards. And the English were still worried about attacks from him up until the late around about 1418, 1419, and were still keeping their castles on guard, on alert, in case there was a raid by Glyndwr's men. So he was still a threat even after his death, probably. There we
are. If I may, diolch yn fawr iawn. Deviating very slightly from the main topic, but I was struck by what you said about an uptick in Welsh nationalism, and obviously how they use Owain Glyndwr's flag and so on. But I wondered if you had any more you could say about that.
Well, unfortunately, I can't, because as a society, we were formed. We're a charitable trust, so it's a proper society. And so part of our constitution is that we are non-political, non-sectarian, and as bilingual as possible, which means it's very useful for us because we don't need to get involved with modern day politics. We just concern ourselves with the politics of the 14th and 15th centuries, which is great for me because otherwise there'd be a few people having fights. But there is a growing feeling, especially I think from lockdown, when the Welsh government, the Senedd in Cardiff, took a different view, a different route to the one in Westminster. And because there were differences shown there, I think a lot of people realised that there were differences between the two countries. And although a lot of powers have been devolved to Cymru, to Wales, there are still a lot that are not. such as taxes, etc. And so we haven't got control of the country. But if we go back to that Pennell letter, we've got a church in Wales, had it since the 1920s, so 100 years now. We've got universities, we've got more than 2 universities, there's 6 or 7, I think, now. But the overall bit about independence is not there. We've got limited independence because we've got the Senedd in Cardiff, as opposed to Machynlleth, where Glyndwr was. But there are only limited powers there, although they are increasing the size of the Senedd by almost over a half. Instead of there being 60 seats there, which is at present, at the next election in a couple of years' time, it's going to be 96 seats.
Wow.
And so possibly there'll be greater powers given to the country then, but we'll see. As I said, we don't get involved with that.
Thank you.
Do we have any other folks that would like to ask a question or make a comment about Gareth's presentation or Owain Glyndwr?
The presentation was wonderful. Thank you. It was very, very informative. I thought I knew sketches and basics of the history, and I knew even less, but now I know a lot more. And I really thank you for the effort and the assistance to us to learn.
Well, it's one of those stories which, I mean, after I retired, I just read and read more about it. I'd already had a lifelong interest in it because I grew up so close to one of the castles he attacked, and we knew the name and we knew a bit of the story. But I must admit, being able to spend all my time going around talking about Glyndwr, I love it. I mean, there are a few other things. Hold on, I might be able to get it on the screen. Can I move this?
Uh-oh, I may have just killed it.
Oh no, it's okay. You don't need to record this. I mean,
No,
this is
I may have killed the share.
Hold on. Can you not see it now?
No, I try sharing again.
No, it's okay. No, we don't. Well, do you want to try and show a few more slides?
Sure, but you gotta take control again.
Okay.
I was gonna try to put more people on the for the question and answer, but now see if you
Hold on. I'm struggling to find how I can minimize this now. Can you see anything on my screen?
No, because you have to take the share.
Here we go. No.
There.
Well, maybe.
Well.
No. Okay. Well, sorry. But one of the things I was going to say was there was a poll done in 1999 by the Sunday Times, where they asked 100 significant people or important people from around the world, scientists, politicians, church officials, etc., who they thought was the most significant figure of the previous millennium, so from 1000 to 2000 CE or AD. And they had people such as the printers, Gutenberg and Caxton. They had William Shakespeare, Leonardo da Vinci, but 7th on the list was Owain Glyndwr, above Isaac Newton, above Galileo, I'm afraid above Abraham Lincoln. He was rated fairly highly by them. I think that Fidel Castro might have been one of the people, and of course, he'd have been very keen on the guerrilla tactics, etc. But also, I heard somewhere that Bill Clinton was a supporter of Glyndwr as being on the list. And I think it's because he studied history in Oxford and must have found out about Glyndwr's story there. That's one of the things. But also...
We can see your screen again, by the way.
Oh, great stuff. Well, if I put this one up, can you see? Okay, from current slide. Is that better?
Yeah, a little bit bigger, right?
Okay, well, there's a marble statue of Glyndwr that was in City Hall in Cardiff. I think I mentioned him at the start, which is, a fantastic thing. But that's because only 13 sculptures were made, and they did a poll in a newspaper to find out who was the most celebrated Welsh person. and Glyndwr came top of the list even over 100 years ago.
Mm.
And so they made a marble statue of him, and there's 12 others there as well. Also, we've got this martingale. Can you see it? No?
Yes, yes. What is it though?
On the right-hand side?
Yeah.
Well, it's part of the livery of a horse. It's either the harness or saddle part of that. And it's a good size. It's about 6 inches across, probably. Well, at least 4 inches across. And inside you can see his coat of arms. But this was discovered in the gateway or the portcullis, underneath the portcullis in Harlech Castle. And so it is very likely that this was part of Glyndwr's livery. And that's on display in St Fagans in the Museum of Rural Life in near Cardiff. What else have we got? We've got some seals, Glyndwr's official seals. These are actually in Hereford Museum across the border. And finally, we've got this fairly innocuous looking piece of wood, which we think, and we're fairly certain, is from Sycharth, his manorial home. Because when Henry V, the future Henry V, attacked it with an army in 1403, it was burned to the ground, which meant that a bridge which went from the bailey of it to the top of the mound fell and was burnt. But this piece of wood is the end of a 21-foot piece of wood which had fallen into the moat that was there. And it lay there until 1891, when, for various reasons, the moat, a hole was made in the moat and the water went out, and they found this huge piece of wood. And it's roughly 2 feet by 2 feet wide, square. And as I say, it was 21 foot long. But the local landowner took it away and held it for about 30 years. And then in the 1920s, the local village hall was being built as a memorial to the First World War, and they needed a lintel for the front. So I think it was 3 saws worth of sawing, because they broke 3 saws trying to do it. They took this end piece off that piece of wood, and the other piece of wood went in and eventually rotted. But this piece of wood was taken to St Fagans as well, and was only found in 2016 when they were looking for a piece of wood to be displayed at one of the Eisteddfods. And they looked at the label, said, oh, well, that's about the right size for our display. And they looked at the label and it said, Sycharth timber from Glyndwr's home. And unfortunately, it's still in a shed in St Fagans, but we're hoping that once it's properly dated, we can get it on display somewhere. Sorry, that's one of my projects.
Oh my golly, that's great.
I'm trying to think, well, oh, there's another slide, so last slide. And it's a picture of our trip in 2015 to the Golden Valley, which is where we think Glyndwr died. And this is the Skirrid Inn that I mentioned in the talk. But another thing we're concerned about is promoting the story. And I mentioned Sian Phillips, the actress, wonderful lady. She's one of our vice presidents. Bryn Terfel, the singer, is another vice president.
No, this is brilliant.
But we've also got... Are we okay?
She fell asleep.
Who what?
Are we back?
I think we're okay.
Okay.
That was an in-between. Keep going. Where are you in the picture?
But we got Bryn Terfel. Sorry?
Where
Far
are
right.
you?
Far right.
Oh, I'm on the far right. It's a wide-angle lens to get me in at the end, I'm afraid.
Are you in the light blue shirt there in the end?
Light blue shirt on the right.
Ah, okay.
Still with the white hair, I'm afraid. It was 9 years ago, so I was, I haven't changed much since then. But Bryn Terfel is another vice president. The actor Michael Sheen has agreed to be a patron. Mererid Hopwood, who is the current archdruid or archdderwydd in the Eisteddfod, she's a patron. But also in the doorway at the back is the singer Robert Plant of Led Zeppelin, who is a very big supporter of Welsh history, and he's a patron of our society as well, which is great, and a lovely man.
Well, excellent, excellent.
But it's about promoting the story. That's the bottom.
Thank heavens you're there, otherwise it might just
Well,
be
it's-
a couple pages in a history book if it was allowed
Well, that's
to
it,
book.
and it's about bringing it to life and keeping it alive. That's the point, and promoting it. Like I said, there we are.
Anyone else, questions or comments for Gareth this afternoon? Well, Gareth, we thank
Well,
you.
it's dark outside here.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. This evening on Gareth's locale, especially with Susan and Meers and Susit also, it's dinner time or past that. We want to thank you so much for coming, and it's really been a joy. I've learned a whole bunch. I learned a little bit when I went on looking at your society page, which is just loaded with information about Owen Glyndwr, and it's you've done a remarkably beautiful job in a short span of time to cover all his history, and we appreciate that the whole bunch, Gareth.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Sorry if I droned on a bit long. Sorry about that.
No, it was perfect.
Great.
Thank you.
It was great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
A
Okay.
pleasure.
Take care.
Yep.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Yep.
A steak and kidney
regards
pie
to-
now, Gareth.
Sorry?
A steak and kidney pie now.
Yeah. Oh, no.
Oh,
No,
Welsh
I'm
lamb,
fine.
Welsh lamb.
Oh,
Well, that would be nicer, wouldn't it? Yes.
Thank you again, Gareth.
Okay.
We'll be
thank
in
you.
touch.
It was very good.
Right.